Next up, we have Todd Furmanski. Todd is a researcher with a focus in interactive digital environments and procedural content generation. He has a PhD in media arts and practice, as well as an MFA in interactive media, both from the University of Southern California of Cinematic Arts. Today, he's going to be talking about Mysty roguelikes, or using first-person point-and-click paradigms with real-time graphics and simulations. Take it away, Todd.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Actually, I have no good way of seeing if that's the case.
We can hear you, yes.
Awesome, great. Sorry. Full screen. Yes, I'll be talking mainly a lot about my experiments with kind of combining two different, what people would consider two different paradigms of gameplay. Often both considered archaic, but also having both amazing amounts of potential, both for in terms of graphics, mechanics, narrative, and just interactivity in general. Just for some history and context about Myst itself, for those who don't know, Myst was originally released in 1993 and really helped popularize CD-ROMs, optical media. It was a 3D space, but you navigated through. What's amazing is that it's basically the best-selling PC game, Mac PC game of the 1990s. It was only really unseated by The Sims in 2002. But it was a 3D space, but the user navigated by going through a series of still images. You'd basically click to see which where you wanted to go. You can move forward or left or right, and it was not real time in any way. Although eventually a real Myst was released, a real-time version of it was released later. The fact that it was made by two people and was the best-selling game of the decade, and used cutting-edge graphics, has a little bit something to do with my thoughts on idea of scoping your project properly. So I'll be getting to that in and out as I go through the talk. But as I said, in Myst, encounters were meticulously scripted. The graphics were state-of-the-art at the time, and it was impossible to die and very hard to lose. At a glance, this doesn't seem to have much in common with Rogue, which uses procedural encounters, ASCII graphics, and helped coin the term permadeath. So combining elements from both games actually ended up proving to have some very promising reactions. For some other images of, on the island itself, the island itself, you go to different other worlds, or they call them ages, and the Myst Island itself is essentially a preview of what each age looks like. One is a heavily forested one. There's an interesting couple of interesting documentaries about how they created the world in a 3D space back when mainstream computer-aided drafting and 3D modeling was, a relatively new thing for a lot of people, unless you're out for people outside of, people who worked with aircraft or designing automobiles. So why? Well, a kind of common thing I discovered about myself is that I love looking at old technical disciplines of the past, which were often defined by technical limitations. In this case, they were enabled in part by the CD-ROM, but were also limited by it. Search speed, they had to aim for a single-speed CD-ROM. The search speed was incredibly slow, so they had to figure out ways of loading images and audio still relatively quickly. But real-time graphics were a pipe dream at that point, at the fidelity that they were rendering at. But now, decades later, what do these often considered obsolete disciplines look like when such limitations are non-existent? And anybody who's made a roguelike knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you assume you're only going to do ASCII graphics, I mean, sky's the limit for simulation, right? So I worked on a lot of multi-year large-scale projects. I've worked a lot with all sorts of games, and a lot of them real-time 3D open-ended immersive worlds. But just for this particular project, there's a lot of things I'm tired of obsessing over. 3D animation I love. Real-time animation is amazing. It's really hard and is diminishing marginal returns. It's like Achilles racing the tortoise. You really hard to make something that doesn't ultimately look goofy or something that looks amazing in every instance. I do not want to spend 3 weeks trying to figure out how to have a character lean over, pick up an object, and show it to you. when you can just write in text, you pick up this item. Performance and frame rate, I've, working with trying to get real-time 3D graphics for decades, and performance was a key obsession. Just want to make it run at 30 FPS. Now we want to make it run at 60 FPS. So I didn't really want to have performance coming in and butting that kind of always constant priority for development. Also working on trying to make games more accessible, and teaching people how to use a 16-button 3-joystick controller is harder than it sounds. What I do want to obsess over is procedural content generation world simulation. I love playing with digital imagery. I love playing with how do you have a computer render things in ways that people might not have thought of before. And I am really curious about elegant interfaces, maybe simple. Simple doesn't mean easy, of course, but I'll get into more of that later. And that's something I think I have a lot of work to work on still. A lot of this started with, we were mentioning ProcGem in earlier talks, but the first one in 2014, I created a work called Forska, which is the Swedish word for research. But it basically was me conglomerating a lot of my own implementations of procedural content generation, experiments in user interface, all sorts of things like that. I'll do a little bit of a live demo. So this is Forska as it was, and this is, while it's using it image by image, this is actually a real-time space. I'm just telling it whenever the user clicks to grab an image and load it in and add a post-processing filter to it. But in this case, I was looking at, instead of having to go image by image, Myst had a sprawling graph of images that the user could go through. I can just generate one on the fly. If I want to turn left to right, I just click on the left or right sides of the image. If I want to move up to the trees, I'll just click there. When I turn, I'll maybe just go into this tree's shadow. If I'm bored, I want to go to this far island, I'll just click on there. And I found I tagged giant glowing magenta portals, which will then lead to other islands, which have their own different sets of terrain and the like. But this is also a way I was looking at. One problem of large, sprawling, open-ended worlds is that if you walk at the same rate, you're always bored if you're walking to a faraway place, or if you're close, it's very hard to move, say, to pick up something very close to you or interact with a desk. So in this way, you almost have an automatic zoom travel, which then played with a lot of how big you can make a virtual space. A lot of virtual spaces are really not limited by memory or storage space, but just by walking speed. So I was kind of curious if that didn't become a concern, how that would end up happening. So let's go back to the slideshow. So Forska itself was me having a way of playing with different concepts of aesthetics, of interface, and simulation. And they don't have to overlap. Indeed, within Forska, a lot of things I was playing with, they didn't even overlap as I was experimenting within the actual scene. But I wanted a kind of way of playing with all three at once if I could. I love playing with AI, but I had a problem. I didn't have a place for the AI to live. I wanted to play with post-processing, but I needed a space to render. So Forska gave me those things. It gave me a wilderness to try, if I wanted to implement A-star, if I wanted to implement swarm behaviors. And again, it can generate a static image from real-time scene graph. All this is, I'm working within Unity. And clicking, I'll raycast to a point on the map and then place the camera where the ray hits a valid standing spot. Instead of running it, instead of having to do everything in a 30th or 60th of a second, I have, fractions of a second, which current eternity, to run any sort of simulation, AI, weather, any sort of thing like that, while the user ponders the next move. The Miller brothers, who worked on Myst, talk about their target was 1 to 2 seconds, and that was coming from like IBM saying the user needs to click on something and have a second or two to get an answer, otherwise they'll think something's wrong. So that was their target for a single speed CD-ROM. And why not beholden to that, being able to have multiple frames without even beginning to think about things like streaming or multi-threading is just really, really liberating. So again, like one element is visual aesthetics. Having, spending my formative years where mainstream real-time 3D graphics were a thing, for the longest time, everything looked alike because everybody just drawing a polygon to the screen fast enough exhausted everybody. And with all the computing power we have, it felt like there was more that we could do. So this is an image of Forska and then later roguelikes without any post-processing on. What if you wanted to make it look like a Roman mosaic or like an oil painting? Or if you're really old school, what if you wanted just ASCII graphics? Because things works for Rogue. This one is one of my quixotic ideas that I know the path leads to madness. Although given some of the earlier talks, I might be in good company. But given the 3D space that's dynamic and has things like weather or agents, what if that's all running but all you see is a textual description in this dynamic space? You can have an image where then interaction with a simple parser to be able to examine the world and interact with it, but again through text. A word's worth 1,000 pictures, and that's something, again, when I look at ways of graphics, text can be paradoxically one of the best graphics ever. I'm playing with other methods of rendition. I output contour maps to high-res vector elements and printed out maps that I could probably sell at REI or any sort of camping or wilderness store. And given seeds, I could then print these out, and basically have now bound books of various islands, which also helped me gauge how well a lot of my procedural content generation systems work. And abstracting the space is, again, nothing new for rogues themselves. That's it. I've seen people freak out by the letter D, knowing that it's a dragon. And don't get me started on ampersands. Actually, yeah, let me go. I'm being bold. Let me just make sure this is still running. Can you make sure you guys can see this? But this is actually the map running in Unity. Feel free to give a holler if it's not broken. But so right now I'm playing with a kind of a Roman mosaic look. But if I go into, let's see, the camera, I can just swap around it, and it's a rabbit hole, but it's a fun rabbit hole to fall down. Let's say I turn off depth of field and the blur. This is what the straight rendered image looks like. But then I can add in a mosaic effect. If I want to separate it the background from the foreground, I'll add a depth of field. Let's say if I want to have kind of an Oberdin-esque monochrome image, that's easy to play with as well. And again, I can kind of blend these back and forth certain amounts. So a lot of this is, again, either things I found on the web to implement or writing my own graphics and overlaying them. Unity is just pretty good about testing the stuff on the fly. And again, I can kind of hit the limits of legibility, but that's, again, another fun path to trace. So I wanted to generate spaces. So this was Forska ended up being a place where I could do that. This was one way I found to help get around Kate Compton's 10,000 bowls of oatmeal is to add toppings, or rather to multiply your possibilities, have orthogonal elements. In this case, I was looking at different types of geology, but on top of various forms of Perlin noise or various noise rendering for trained shapes. So I could have a mountain range that would had a granite base and used a temperate ecosystem, or a glacial one that used blue ice and white snow. And even that would end up making, if I had four types of geology and four types of general island shapes that multiply together, and you get a lot more bang for the buck. Not to mention layering further things on top of it. One of the benefits of not real-time graphics is even though I'm rendering static images, and within Forska, I kind of default would update every second or so, it's still a dynamic space. It's changing lighting, changing time of day is trivial. Weather, lighting, all of that stuff is still a lot of fun to play with, whereas, back in the 90s, you'd have to render a day image and a night image, and rendering a 3D image would take minutes or hours or even days, depending. So having be able to call one up in a fraction of a second is still really powerful and a lot of fun to play with, especially if you're not trying to push every last ounce of CPU power out of it. I wanted to implement AI, but I found A-star is actually an excellent path maker along with a pathfinder. Especially given the space I'm in, I was trying to figure out ways of leading players to points of interest. So given 2 points of interest, this would find an optimal path. If you take into account slope for path cost, you end up getting automatic switchbacks for free. In this case, I had a portal leading to various plinths or ruins. And again, you already kind of see a switchback coming up a mountainside. Adding it a little bit of noise, make sure it's not too straight. And when you're on the ground, it adds actually a nice element of contrast, even if it's noon on a snowy landscape. This gives you something to kind of lock onto and follow, knowing that there's something probably interesting at the end of it. Especially since I like really blurry painterly effects. So bringing that back in or adding another element of contrast, along with adding things like edge detection or line finding, is good. And this is what, again, the image looks like without such processing on top of it. User interface, again, that's something I'm looking at. Again, a lot of it's pick your poison. It's hard. Everybody's going to tell you it's hard. Anybody tells you it's easy, it's not tried it or is lying. And again, it's a lot of it's pick your poison. If you want to use a PlayStation or Xbox controller to show somebody how to walk and do something as mundane as walking or picking up an object, that's really intimidating. Try teaching a grandmother how to walk using 3 controllers and 16 buttons. Mobile is its own set of poison. It's just a flat piece of glass or lab-grown sapphire. Really up to you to kind of how dense or how minimal you want. But having no interface is as bad as having no interface sometimes. So trying to adapt a lot of these. Also in Forska, I did do some tie-ins, playing with the Kinect, did do some VR tests, which was its own set of interesting elements. I don't have too much time. Maybe I can talk about that later on with some questions. But Rogue has its own, as going back to one of the first talks, about how computers really are just machines that think they're running paper tape through it, and Rogue still has a lot of that element to it. So again, there's some people who wouldn't use it to anything else, but again, you have to make a lot of decisions about how you use your interface. So I wanted, again, a space where I could play with a lot of these things. And this was just a short little beginning of me trying to add in just a very minimal roguelike element where you have items, text, and adding in agents. Oh, this is still, streaming's a little slow. I can probably end up showing that as well. I'll show some clips of that later on. But this is just the very beginning of adding in 2D or 3D models or 2D sprites, but then having the post-process effect hide any seams or just make it mesh well better with the environment. But field of view is also something that gets very front and center when you're dealing with a first-person camera. Something needs to be right in front of your face before you actually notice it. If it's at your feet, you're going to be blind to it. So you have more control over where the player can be if they're not running everywhere, and can only move in very static incremental changes. But that gives you less of an excuse if you script the camera angle. But as far as Rogue, combining the turn-based system is one thing Myst and Rogue share. And I think one of the unique tensions that are a combination of a procedurally generated environment, permadeath, and turn-based elements is that you do get weird elements of tension where there's literally dozens of possible actions you can make, but you come down to the point where the next action that you take will mean your life or death. But there's, there you have as much time as you want to make that decision. No pressure. Go make a cup of coffee or something. Maybe you can find that use for that expired coupon you found, or a bottle cap that you found in the trash pile over there. Maybe that will do something. Dragon will still be here. So when somebody asks me what's the game you're going to make with this, that kind of throws me for a loop. I'm trying actually a bunch of smaller experiments to kind of, again, test various things and to hopefully make sure I finish things. Trying doing a straightforward dungeon crawler, just primarily to stress test UI, inventory, and agent behaviors. Even doing something by the numbers, you'll often come up with something very different than what you expected. And as a proof of concept, it's just fewer questions to ask. If I want to get the UI right, I don't want to be distracted by trying to make a very wildly different game mechanically. I want to make a procedural horror game, something inventory heavy. You're set on a haunted island. The actual monster is procedurally generated, allowing you to be as informed and as stupid as a typical horror movie character. Maybe you should go into that basement. Maybe bullets will work on that vampire that you can only see in mirrors. Again, I still like using just exploratory games, walking simulators, experimenting with panoramic renders. The real-time to turn-based is a very blurry spectrum. So imagine rendering a spherical or cube-mapped scene that you can look around in real time, and then you only update where your position is whenever you click. Again, you saw that text-heavy renders of a 3D space. You saw I teased that earlier. Whether that's going to be a clever scene graph or just a machine-learned agent that is describing an image that you can't see. I don't know. That's a lot of things to think about. I mean, making only one game with these ideas seems like kind of a waste. So I guess in short, a lot of I use post-processing to kind of hide a lot of graphical shortcomings or just annoyances. Not having to deal with animation frees up if I'm a solo developer working on a hobby project. You still need to take a lot of care. It doesn't necessarily make things easier. It often just makes things possible. And think about what you want to work on. What are your strengths, weaknesses, and what do you want to work on, even if those aren't necessarily the exact same things. But like any good rogue player, pick your battles. Again, there's a lot of inspiration and lessons from the past, and when you combine those with modern techniques, sometimes it feels like martial arts training where you were wearing weights and then suddenly you take the weights off, and suddenly the possibilities become endless. And my cats tend to sabotage my computer equipment, but here are a picture of my cats. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me talk.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful. It's super cool. Lots of people in the chat were talking about how good it looks and coming up with ideas for sorts of games that you could make with it.
Excellent.
Let's see if there are any questions. Someone asks, do you have any thoughts on using neural networks to procedurally generate scenes from scene graphs by compositioning images as a way of making visuals for the game, or compositing images?
Machine learning, I have a really weird love-hate relationship with it. Beyond just getting the libraries working in the first place, it's so much of it is not only the interface of the procedure, but how you want to work with it. And I've seen amazing things done with machine learning. I've tried a lot of things with the like the style transfers. I find amazing. But again, I often find it's machine learning is almost like like some of the 3D prints everything in immaculate marble. But if you want to make a car, that car won't drive. Like once you have a perfectly looking marble car, but it won't be able to drive. It's working with something afterwards is always tricky to me. And training, but it's definitely something I'm looking at. And again, Forska was kind of built to house. If I do machine learning, it's a lot of I'm going to let it loose in this space and try to let it run free. But yeah, it's definitely on my list. I have a series of machine learning leaks for terrain generation, for image generation, for agent behavior. I mean, there's definitely a lot to look at there.
Yeah. Someone else wants to know what your cats' names are.
The silver one is Zorro, and the bronze one is Matilda. They are not related, but they are siblings.
Cool. There aren't any other questions, but there's lots of great comments in the chat. I'm sure people would love to talk to you about all of their fun ideas for this. if you hang out in the social space somewhere.
Yeah, I might go to the procedural library,
The ProcGen library.
ProcGen library, and take questions.
Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful weekend.